Mike Nostalgia, Dave here in our podcast. What's going on in pop culture right now? We got a massive pod because unexpectedly surprise drop from the clouds. Kendrick Lamar, new album, GNX. So much to get into with that. Very exciting. And that's, of course, on top of our already very anticipated movie weekend with Wicked and Gladiator 2. And I'm also going to talk about two other movies that I got to as well. Clint Eastwood's Juror number 2, perhaps his final film, and also Steve McQueen's latest film, Blitz. So make sure you subscribe, youtube.com/nostalgiapod, linktree.com/nostalgiapod. See the links below. Get the best of 2024 Spotify playlist link below. Let me know it's good. Let's get into it. What's up, Womack Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of Clint Eastwood's new legal thriller courtroom drama film, Juror number 2, starring Nicholas Hoult. This is perhaps the final film from Clint Eastwood. Of course, Clint in his 90s has made dozens on dozens of films as a director, in addition to the countless movies he starred in his 50, 60 plus year long career at the movies. A legendary run, to be sure. And people seem to think this is probably his last one. We don't know. It very well could not be. We know that Clint Eastwood works quickly, one tank Clint, so I would not be shocked if he makes another movie. But I think the reason a lot of this, comment is coming about because Juror number 2 is a really good time. And it's such a shame what's happened with this movie, with Warner Brothers basically shelving the movie while still releasing it. This movie was released in only 50 theaters in the United States with no plans for expansion at all. And it's held those 50 theaters more or less for the last 3 weeks or so. When this originally happened, people were worried it was going to be like a 1 week release and be done, but it's at least hanging around. But like, that's such a paltry release, and it's such a shame because Clint Eastwood has been a very loyal servant and collaborator to Warner Brothers, decades in the making at this point, right? He's worked with Warner Brothers across many owners and managements and everything, and he's stayed with them. And yet Warner Brothers has taken a really callous approach to Clint's perhaps final film, and the excuse being bandied about is that his previous movie, Cry Macho, a film I didn't really care for that much, did not do that well at the box office. That being said, was not exactly an expensive movie per se, just like Juror number 2 isn't. David Zaslav at Warner Bros. Discovery, invoking the famous quote, "It's show business, not show friends," and yet it just feels like a strange stance to take because Juror number 2 is a very crowd-pleasing legal thriller film coming out the same year that Presumed Innocent was a massive hit on Apple TV Plus. Meanwhile, Warner's released the Robert Zemeckis film Here, which had really no chance of finding any audience at the box office, and of course did in fact bomb. It's just a bad situation all around, and of course, the worst thing about it is that this is a good movie, and you wish this was in front of more people and getting more awareness. Of course, with a release that small, Warner Bros. Is not promoting this movie in the slightest, so we'll see what happens. This will eventually show up on Max, you would imagine, pretty soon. I would not expect much of an awards run for the movie either, though, just because of the lack of resources Warner Bros. Wants to invest in the movie. Nonetheless, I think Juror number 2 is good. Despite the lack of faith from Warner Brothers, I liked Clint Eastwood's Juror number 2 a lot, and if this is his final film, it's a really awesome movie to end a legendary career with. The premise is so tight and yet very compelling. What if a juror selected for a high-profile murder trial begins to learn that perhaps they are actually responsible for the crime in question? Nicholas Hoult does a great job in the lead role, and the movie, I think, really presents a lot of, questionable morals and ethical decisions, and certainly makes you think. It's a lot thornier and rougher around the edges than something like this perhaps could have been in someone else's hands. And of course, when the movie progresses to a 12 Angry Men-esque jury deliberation set of sequences, it's, again, really compelling drama. This is a formula that people like for a reason. It's just very engaging. In smaller roles, you have Toni Collette as the prosecutor and Chris Messina as the defense attorney, both giving good performances. J.K. Simmons is another member of the jury who has more to contribute than he initially leads on. These are small parts for the most part, but they all lend themselves, I think, well to the progression of the film. Even Zoe Deutsch, I think, does a good job with the movie, despite the fact that she's really only playing a thankless pregnant wife role to Holt's main character. It's also great to see Kiefer Sutherland pop up kind of out of nowhere as a Alcoholics Anonymous rep for Nicholas Holt's character Justin, who also kind of doubles as his voice of reason and legal advice once Justin starts to really question what he should do, as he's clearly being consumed by the key conflict that he's found himself in. Justin is a new father who needs to send an innocent man to prison to prevent himself from going to prison and breaking his own family. It's a really challenging quandary, and the movie doesn't really leave you with easy answers per se. I think the progression of the plot leaves you just with a lot to kind of chew on, and like the ending and its abruptness certainly contributes to that. So yeah, in conclusion, I really enjoyed Clint Eastwood's Juror number 2. It's both crowd pleasing but also pretty thought provoking at the same time. It's a nice, I think, like elevated version of the traditional like legal drama. It's certainly more down the middle than say Anatomy of a Fall was last year. It's not quite that in depth, but I think the simple yet effective presentation of the clear conflict in this film is really compelling. But let me know, what did you think of Clint Eastwood's Juror number 2? Did you like it as much as I did? Let me know, and for more movie reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. What's up, Womack Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of Blitz, the new war drama film from Steve McQueen, starring Saoirse Ronan and Harris Dickinson, and newcomer child actor Elliot Heffernan. This is Steve McQueen's first work since he released the anthology film series Small Axe on Amazon Prime Video back in 2020. That was a series that had some feature-length films that were really good, such as Mangrove, some other stuff that was a little less effective, but overall really worthy effort and very much in the lineage of what you expect from the thought-provoking works of McQueen. But this is his first feature film since Widows came out way back in 2018, so it's certainly been a minute. I, of course, was really anticipating this film because Steve McQueen is simply one of the best directors we have right now. He's incredibly effective and talented and unique, and the filmmaking meets the ideas. Like, he's really great. Blitz has been anticipated for some time. We thought maybe it was going to come out last year. It doesn't. It comes out this year, and it doesn't even do the traditional festival, premiere circuit. It kind of foregoes all the North American festivals and premiered at BFI in London this past fall, and then did a kind of limited release because this is an Apple film, so it had a small release in the UK, even smaller in the United States, and is now on Apple TV Plus. I really struggled with Steve McQueen's Blitz. On its surface, a film about the bombing of Britain during the heyday of World War II should be really compelling subject matter for a director as talented as Steve McQueen. And when you have Saoirse Ronan and Harris Dickinson as your two big leads in the movie, you should get excited about the prospect. The issue I have with Blitz, I did not want to spend this film following around a 9-year-old boy. Harris Dickinson has like 2 lines in the first hour of the movie. It's a really nothing part. And Saoirse Ronan, she plays a mother who's lost her son. She does a good job with the material, but ultimately the material isn't even that deep for her. It's really no shots at Elliot Heffernan, who plays this 9-year-old boy, George, who jumps off a train taking kids out of the city into the countryside to protect them from the bombings. His adventure back to his mom, that unsurprisingly goes quite perilously. That's all fine and good, but I just didn't really enjoy the adventure. The issue is this movie doesn't really know what it wants to be. Is it a movie about the sheer terror of the Blitz and surviving that? Sometimes. Is it a movie about racial identity during that time? Because George, of course, is biracial, having a black father. It tackles that sometimes, not that much, certainly less than I expected given McQueen's history. Is about women's role on the home front in general during the war effort, a little bit. Like, I just kind of struggle with this movie coming all together. There's certainly some dynamite sequences, namely some stuff in the underground and the subway, as many people flock there as like makeshift bomb shelters. There's certainly some good material there and some like compelling set pieces for sure. Stephen Graham makes a big appearance as the leader of like a gang of looters who are going after bombed out buildings and looking for valuables. But to me, I just never quite like totally invested in like the dramatic heft of the journey that George was on to get back to his mom. And when he finally does get back to his mom at the very end, I just didn't feel like it landed with much like pomp and circumstance the way you think it should. As I mentioned, Harris Dickinson's completely wasted. He plays a firefighter of some sort who's responding to the incessant bombings and knows Saoirse Ronan's character from living in the same neighborhood, something like that. I thought their relationship would maybe progress or evolve or come together in some kind of way as they, have a shared trauma, in real time. But no, it doesn't really even get there. I don't think the movie does a really good job portraying the bombings that much because we're so grounded the whole time. And obviously, there's some harrowing stuff watching, buildings being on fire. And the movie starts with, I think, a really nice little sequence where a firefighter knocks himself out turning on a fire hose trying to put out a fire. But like apart from like some of those sequences which look nice, I think the CGI overheads of a bombed out Britain or Britain being bombed at night, like those don't really look that great, add that much because they're so clearly like out of sync with like the rest of the movie, which is so grounded. I did enjoy some of the early stuff with George when he's on the train, when he's interacting with other kids giving him shit, assumingly because he's the one who looks different. It's fun to watch George jump off the train, link up with some other kids on a different train back to London. There's a really harrowing, kind of unexpected and sharp surprise death during that time, which I think certainly lands. But to me, it just comes across as a movie that has like a lot of like disparate parts and doesn't have like a grand like sweeping like statement or through line of any kind, and that's just so unlike the rest of Steve McQueen's filmography. So I'm disappointed by the movie for sure. They're going to campaign it for the awards, but I'm not sure how successful it'll be. Of course, Saoirse Ronan's always in the mix, given she's four-time nominee already. By the time she got to age 30, she also has another movie that's been widely celebrated out now, The Outrun, featuring another strong performance from her. So I'm not really expecting her to break through the field for Best Actress. Small part. Steve McQueen, certainly someone who has got a lot of Oscar attention, of course, in the past with 12 Years a Slave. I'm not really expecting much this time around. It's a bit of a soft miss for me. I mean, it's not like it's like egregiously bad. It's just not a movie that really comes together. And if anything, if everyone involved, obviously very much looking forward to what's next from Steve McQueen. Hopefully we find out soon. And Harris Dickinson, we know, is about to star in Baby Girl with Nicole Kidman coming out next month. And by all accounts, that's a movie that'll have people talking. I'm very excited to see that. So I think that'll kind of complete his big breakout, so to speak. Maybe it's already complete, depends how you view his rise to this point with like the Iron Claw last year and whatnot. Semantics, I guess, at this point. Harris Dickinson's a star, very exciting. And Saoirse, I think like in terms of her roles, this and the Outrun feel a little smaller recently. Like we haven't had anything super monumental from her since her Greta Gerwig run, which is now a handful of years ago. That being said, I'm not doubting her at all. I'm a big fan, and we know she has pretty impeccable taste when it comes to picking projects, picking people to work with, so I have no reason to doubt that at all. And yeah, I mean, Steve McQueen was bound to not have a banger eventually, so happens to the best of them. It's really nothing to worry about, but let me know, what did you think of Blitz? Did you like it more than me? If so, please let me know why. And for more movie reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. What's up, Womack Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of Gladiator 2, the new epic historical action film from Ridley Scott. Of course, this is 24 years in the making, the follow-up to 2000's Gladiator, one of the biggest blockbuster movies of recent times, kind of the last vestige of old school traditional Hollywood filmmaking before the dawn of CGI. Of course, that film, a rousing success, wins Best Picture. A sequel to Gladiator had been in various stages of development over the past 24 years, but now we're finally here with an actual sequel. Ridley Scott back in the director's chair, David Scarpa writing the screenplay, having just worked with Ridley Scott on Napoleon. Also, cinematographer John Matheson is back for the sequel. I liked Gladiator 2 a lot. Now, this is clearly a legacy sequel and by definition really doesn't compare at all to its predecessor, but I had a great time watching Gladiator 2. There are some tremendous performances in this movie. Chief among them is Denzel Washington, who steals the show as Macronus. Paul Mescal does not have quite the gravitas that Russell Crowe has. Few actors do, but he does do a good job playing a different type of character. And I think the differences that Gladiator 2 has is what actually surprised me most about this movie. There's a lot of structural similarities, but there was a lot of surprise for me as well in this movie that I wasn't expecting having seen the trailer. I thought the trailer was going to give away more than it ends up doing. Some of the emotional moments, the various plot mechanics have up and down effectiveness in Gladiator 2. This is not as tight and as masterful of a movie as the first. Now we think about like the very premise of Gladiator getting a sequel. Of course it was going to be at least somewhat differently because of course Russell Crowe's Maximus dies at the end of the first Gladiator, and iconic moment, iconic end for an iconic character, right? And now we've traveled about 16, I think, years in the future, as they say. We're now under the rule of twin brother emperors, Gaeta and Caracalla, played by Joseph Quinn and Fred Hetchinger, and we've kind of descended into the familiar like late Roman period where Rome is characterized by excess and never-ending violence and war, both in the games and overseas, and there's growing, public unrest and whatnot. We're long past the five great emperors period, which of course ends with Marcus Aurelius, who meets his end at the beginning of the first Gladiator movie. Our central character in Gladiator 2 is Lucius, played by Paul Mescal. Of course, Lucius is the young blonde boy with the bowl cut in the first Gladiator movie. A small character, to be sure. Lucilla, played by Connie Nielsen, who is also back in this movie. In fact, the only two actors that are returning from the first movie are Connie Nielsen and also Derek Jacobi as Gracchus, one of the Roman senators. It was kind of clever to use Lucius as the way back into this world and this story in terms of having some kind of through line. It makes sense that he would be sent away following the deaths of Maximus and Commodus because his existence was a threat to other people's desire for the throne. It makes a lot of sense. And if you think about what's happened in like Roman history, in the lead up to this point where the movie takes place, we're now like in a new dynastic family ruling Rome. So Lucius's claim to the throne, that he is of course renounced, is very tenuous. But anyway, I think that origin makes sense. It is an interesting juxtaposition though, right? Because Maximus was to be bestowed the title of emperor by Marcus Aurelius, foregoing the line and of course ensuing Commodus's wrath, as we know, kicking off the first movie. Whereas Paul Mescal is actually like the Prince of Rome. He actually has a claim to the throne. It's kind of different. And of course, keeping that theme, Maximus is a natural leader. He's literally a general of the Roman army. And Lucius is just a kind of a loner drifter who has gone off and made his own life in spite of his Roman upbringing. So they're different characters is the point. So to me, like, I can forgive the fact that Paul Mescal is not quite as seen stealing and like carrying all this gravitas the way Russell Crowe does, because they're playing two different types of characters. That being said, towards the end of the movie, where Lucius has to speechify a bit, he doesn't do it to the same strength as Russell Crowe does, unsurprisingly. But I think to his credit, I enjoyed Paul Mescal in the movie because he does have a presence. He certainly has a physicality when it comes to the Colosseum scenes and the violence in the movie. And in general, I think Lucius, his portrayal of Lucius is pretty good in the movie, given what the material is and what the character is. We know Paul Mescal can be quite charismatic. He is a very charming person in real life in terms of what we see, publicly as him as a celebrity and in other films. And I was really excited that he was cast in this movie because, I mean, the superstar rise of Paul Mescal ever since The Normal People breakout in 2020 has been amazing to watch. And he was a great choice for this role. I think just if anything, the role of Lucius required some stoicism that just makes it a less flashy performance than Crowe gets to give as Maximus. In terms of the structural similarities, again, there's a lot of, especially early days stuff, right, where you have Lucius gets enslaved by the Roman army, gets purchased by a gladiator, manager, slave owner, right, and he starts training it to be a gladiator and return to Rome and fight in the Colosseum. a lot of similarities to what happens in the beginning of Gladiator, right? So much so that the Gladiator trainer slash owner, Oliver Reed's Proximo in the first movie, it's now Denzel Washington's Macronus in the second movie. Both Maximus and Lucius have other gladiators that you recognize and follow them throughout the course of the film. Uh, Much like the first movie, Lucius is accompanied by a very tall gladiator who's just completely jacked once again. And for me, the biggest surprise, like going into the movie, having seen the trailer, in the lead up to it, I was like, so what is like where does the similarities continue to take us, right? Because like you think about the first movie, it ends with this final confrontation between Maximus and Commodus, and Maximus versus Commodus, and Commodus's wish but inability to have Maximus killed for fear of making him immortal. Like that central conflict, and in terms of Maximus's family feeling his desires to continue to fight, all that's like really easy to discern in such a triumph in the first movie, right? When you watch the trailer for Gladiator 2, you're like, huh, is Pedro Pascal's Roman general Acacius character, is that the actual villain? Because in the trailer you see them fighting in the Colosseum, like, oh, is that the build up to it? And how do the emperors kind of fade into that? What is Denzel Washington's role? Of course, Denzel Washington, one of the greatest actors of all time. He's not going to just take any role at this point. He's not even that much of not active an actor anymore. So, what is his part to play in this? And what surprised me about it is that we learn very early on that Acacius, Pedro Pascal's character, isn't actually much of an antagonist at all. Despite his early introduction in the film, where we see his Roman campaign in Numidia, which results in the death of Lucius's wife and his enslavement. Despite all that, he's actually good. Acacius is married to Kai Nielsen's Lucilla, Lucius's mom, and they both have this desire to return Rome to its former glory in terms of serving its citizens and not just being this bloodthirsty, violent, bacchanalian excess. They invoke, and not for the last time in the movie, Marcus Aurelius' original dream, right? His dream to maintain, the good of Rome, the dream of Rome. That's, alluded to in the beginning of the movie before Commodus starts, acting a fool. I found that like premise pretty compelling, especially because it ultimately leads to an earlier than expected confrontation between Acacius and Lucius, who's going by Hanno in the movie until we learn his true identity. Hanno and Acacius fighting, but not really wanting to fight, especially on Acacius' part, and then Acacius being killed at the behest of the emperors when his treachery to the emperors is exposed by a treacherous Macronus. He's like, oh, then the movie starts to fall into place. And that's where the movie changes, right? Because Proximo in the first Gladiator, this big sacrifice, right? He saves Maximus alongside most of his gladiators, right? He makes the ultimate sacrifice. He's good. But Macronus is actually the true villain of the movie, and his quest for revenge against Rome, having been a former slave himself, a slave to Marcus Aurelius specifically, that is kind of been replaced with this ill-begotten, unimaginable, unconquestable, like lust for power. So as a result, there's no actual like final confrontation in the Colosseum the way you get with Maximus and Commodus. What you actually have is this confrontation outside the walls of Rome on the battlefield as the various factions of the Roman army are watching, and we try and basically learn the fate of what's to come. And again, to get to that point, that means that both of the emperors, Geta and Caracalla, are taken off the board a little earlier than you'd expect. In particular, Macrinus arranges the death of Joseph Quinn's Geta, who was the more capable emperor of the two brothers, and then knowing he can manipulate Caracalla, who is seemingly having mental illness due to the effects of syphilis, it seems. So as a result, like Denzel is really the star of this movie in many respects because he gets to certainly chew the most scenery and have the most fun in the movie. He is not stoic the way Paul Mescal's Hanno Lucius is, right? And yeah, it kind of surprised me. I wasn't expecting the movie to quite go down that road. Now, in terms of where Gladiator 2 gets tripped up and comes up a bit short, especially when you compare it to its predecessor, which isn't completely fair, but it's a named sequel, so it's going to happen. I think the emotional elements that were so central to the first movie, namely Maximus's lust for revenge against his murdered, family and whatnot, right? Like, and he's clearly being someone who's good, but also someone who immediately motivates everyone to fight for him, and you as a viewer, you're like completely on board, right? That again, Lucius being a different type of character, that is not quite present in this movie, and when they start to change Lucius's, motivations to want to be more of a uh, fighter for all, it comes across a bit abrupt. Also, I think Kai Nielsen's Lucilla is not the most compelling character, honestly, and she's given kind of a lot to carry emotionally, dramatically in this movie, especially in the second half. And I just don't know if it completely lands. You're just not quite as invested in this. And frankly, the reveal about the other side of Lucius's parentage. People are unsure. Lucilla rumored to have taken many lovers at the time. We believe revoking the advances of her brother Commodus, but who is the actual dad? Turns out the dad is actually Maximus himself. So Lucius is also the son of Maximus, in addition to being the nephew of Commodus, and thus actually in line for the throne. And that's not something that like surprised me per se. I was completely like open to that idea, but I don't know if it necessarily lands with like any extra impact the way I think they want it to. Gladiator 2 is also existing during a time when CGI is a necessary evil at worst, also a great tool at best when it comes to blockbuster filmmaking. So as a result, the combat sequences, the big set pieces of this movie, are staged in a different way than they were in the first one, which was almost entirely practical. This case, which, and a lot of this unfortunately was in the trailer, too much for my taste, but a lot of the big set pieces involve some kind of CG. The early fight outside of Rome, mini Colosseum fight where Lucius has to fight off against a bunch of baboons, all CGI. His first fight in the Colosseum is against this undefeated Gladiator who's standing atop a CGI rhinoceros. And of course, the second big showstopper, a flooding of the Colosseum, which was an amazing set piece that they did. I thought that was super cool, but it involves CGI sharks swimming throughout the Colosseum. And when you think about these like moments compared to their predecessors, their analogs in the first movie, I think about like the first scene of Maximus in the Colosseum proper in Rome, where he fights what was the guy's name, like Tigress of Gaul or something, the guy with the tiger mask all armored up and stuff. An amazing fight. I think the rhino fight's still pretty good, but like watching Mescal dive out of the way of a not real rhinoceros isn't quite as dramatic. I liked the ship fight with the flooded Colosseum fine, but I think having CGI sharks, and like a lot of them, and also the fact that like that's probably the most egregious thing historically accuracy wise. Like there's no chance the Romans captured sharks, let alone that many, and then transported them that far inland to flood the Colosseum. Like it's just not, it takes you out in my opinion. It just looks so unreal, but it's super cool to be with a flooded Colosseum. I wish that moment was a complete surprise, to be honest, but that thing is of course in the trailer. And then of course you have like the final fight outside the gates between Macrinus and Lucius, which I think was pretty good. I actually liked that fight. I thought Denzel was credible in the battle against Lucius. Of course, he loses, but like, despite the fact that he's a lot older as a character, I think it still worked pretty well. I love how like they started to fight in the stream and stuff, and he was like kicking embers and stuff. I thought it was a good fight. So like in conclusion, like I think these are all good set pieces, but none of them are as tremendous as what you get in the first film. And again, just kind of speaks to the strength of practical effects and the gravitas of that kind of filmmaking can carry. If anything, though, most disappointing to me, and again, like I'm saying, disappointing in quotes, I really did enjoy the movie for what it is, despite recognizing these faults. Like, I would have loved a greater confrontation between Lucius and the Emperors, particularly Emperor Geta, played by Joseph Quinn. Arguably the best set piece in the movie is this fight between Lucius and this other, gladiator, but it's not in the Colosseum. It's this hand-to-hand brawl in the middle of this Roman party inside this mansion of one of the senators, and it's watched by all the characters. The emperors are there. They're having a rhinoceros feast, shaving off rhino horn. Like I thought that scene worked completely, and then having this really physical fight in that moment was sick, honestly, because you felt the punch, you felt the weight of that violence, that hand to hand combat, the way we think of movies like John Wick or Mission Impossible or something. Like that was like you felt that combat, that was real. And then watching like Joseph Quinn and Fred Hetchinger like eat it up, from just a short distance away. Like I would have loved to see more stuff like that. That was so cool. Also, the fight, however brief, between Acacius and Lucius when they have to fight unwittingly, I think that was really good. Even the early battle in Numidia, which is northern Africa, like modern day like Tunisia, Libya ish area, like thought that fight was good. Pedro Pascal, unsurprisingly, incredibly capable in combat and in an arena. Of course, making his name as Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper on Game of Thrones. We know he can fucking hang in a combat sequence, and it was so great to see him do it once again. In terms of the Emperors and what we do get from them, Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal as Commodus was an instant classic as soon as we got it, especially coming at the time it did. Joaquin's still on his like rise to superstardom, getting an Oscar nomination for that role. Tremendous stuff, incredibly villainous, right? But also such a scene stealer. I think Quinn does a really nice job as Gaeta. I liked him quite a bit, and Joseph Quinn is someone who, the stock is at an all-time high at this point, right? Just in such a short amount of time, kind of like Paul Mescal, right? Joseph Quinn is just rocketed up into the A-list with Stranger Things, into Quiet Place Day 1, to Gladiator 2, and now we're going to get him in Fantastic Four, and he's also apparently going to be George Harrison in the Sam Mendes Beatles movies. Like, shout out Joseph Quinn, he's crushing it, and he's really good. I think he's charismatic in the role as Gaeta, and kind of has a bit of the Commodus lean in the performance, and like he's intelligent but also kind of manic, and makes sense for how we're kind of being told about how Rome is existing in this time. The Fred Hetchinger performance I liked less. Fred Hetchinger, probably best known for White Lotus season 1. We just saw him in Nickel Boys. He's a rising actor as well, though not on the degree of Quinn or Mescal for sure. His performance is a bit more one note, but like he's having fun with the performance because he gets to play someone manic. He's someone who's deranged from syphilis, right? So it makes sense. And I was kind of disappointed though when Macronus like gets Caracalla to kill Gaeta, because I was like, oh wait, that's it for Joseph Quinn? I was loving Joseph Quinn in the movie, and we spend more time with Caracalla as a result before he also meets his end. But I was like, I know this performance. Like I know what's going on. He's being manipulated. He's one note. There's not much more under the hood with that Hetchinger performance because that's the material. I would have loved more Joseph Quinn. I would have loved another scene. Just even give me like really one one with Lucius and Gaeta would have been nice. Also, I think in terms of talking about the emotion of the film and how it doesn't quite land, and the other piece of that is we're told a lot about how like Rome is not well anymore, and the people are hungry and there's unrest and stuff. But like every time we see bits of Rome and anything outside the Colosseum, everything seems alive, well and good. It doesn't look that different from the first movie. Then when we get to the riots at the end, because the people seemingly are rejecting the death of Acacius and the death of Lucilla as well, it feels like it's a bit of a show don't tell situation where it's like I just didn't quite feel the work was done enough to communicate the differences in the circumstances, and like even like the Senate politicking in this movie, which is I think a really strong like third plot line in the first Gladiator. The Senate politicking, you have this one guy who gets over leveraged gambling wise to Denzel's Macromus, and which this leads to all the betrayals and whatnot. His character, I think, is nice and a fun addition for what he is. But Gracchus coming back, Derek Jacobi coming back, doesn't really have a whole lot beyond that one scene. And again, like the whole like Senate, I guess the Senate is becoming a bunch of sycophants, and Macronus gets to like waltz into power. Like, I guess it was like a little bit more on that side of things too, just because it doesn't feel like Rome was sufficiently colored in enough to then have the movie end with all this like big upheaval. You're not quite as invested in like the chain of events because I just don't think the ground was completely settled yet. Also, I'd be remiss not to talk about what I think will go down as one of the great Hollywood casting what ifs in recent memory, which was that Barry Keoghan was supposed to be Emperor Caracalla in this movie. He was officially cast in the role, then had to drop out due to scheduling conflicts, leading to Fred Hetchinder replacing him. Man, that is a bummer. Again, no shots at Fred Hetchinder. He's a nice actor. But like Barry Keoghan, that's someone on the level of Joseph Quinn and Paul Mescal. That would have been insane. And I would have loved to see Quinn and Keoghan play off each other. That, to me, I don't want to call it a miss, just because the character is what the character is. Caracalla is a bit more one note. I think Barry would have added more texture and surprise to that character and that performance. So, bit of a bummer. So yeah, in conclusion, I liked Gladiator 2 quite a bit. I feel like I harped on a lot of the problems. That's because I hold a movie to a really high bar. I still think it's a really rollicking good time, and unlike most blockbusters you get, without a shadow of a doubt, like there's few movies working on this level. And once again, hats off to Sir Ridley Scott, who turns 87 years old in a week's time. This guy is a beast. He is incredibly awe-inspiring with his work ethic despite his age, and that is not stopping. He's shooting 2 movies next year. The adaptation of the sci-fi novel, what is it called? The Dog Days, the Dog Stars. He's shooting the Dog Stars in April, and that Bee Gees movie in September. So he has recently alluded to a Gladiator 3 idea in the works, but I mean, that movie can't even shoot until 2026, so it's not really spend too much time thinking about that given where Ridley is at life. But man, what a legend. Like, he just continues to work, and even though his movies, not all of them are spectacular, at this late period of his career, everything is interesting. Everything has a ton of craft, and even the things that maybe don't work quite as well or have polarizing elements, like A House of Gucci, like a Napoleon, there's still a lot of worthy things about them, and all these movies are worth seeing. What a way to cap a career, the way he's continuing to move. So really exciting. Gladiator 2, it sounds like the box office is going to be pretty strong. It's not going to be on Wicked levels, but as a result, we're going to have a massive box office weekend, and this whole like end of the November corridor with Moana 2 about to come out as well. Times are good at the movies, and we'll see about Oscar attention. I'm not sure if this movie quite has the full legs to totally get there. I think there was a lot more confidence about that before people started seeing the movie. I think maybe some of the warts might hold Gladiator 2 back in that regard. We'll find out. But yeah, let me know. What did you think of Gladiator 2? What was your favorite moment about it? And for more movie reviews, subscribe. And I'll see you next time. What's up, Womack Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of Wicked Part 1, the musical fantasy film adaptation of the long-running Wizard of Oz prequel musical that debuted on Broadway over 20 years ago after being adapted from a 90s book. The Wizard of Oz, obviously one of the most famous and most widely seen films in the history of the world. And Wicked, to its credit, when it came out, again, a long time ago at this point, Wicked is one of the best examples of a prequel actually adding to its property and showing you something new and having its own worth in its own regard, and not just being a example of diminishing returns. I've seen the original Wicked play back in 2017 in London, liked it quite a bit, and Wicked Part 1 is going to be a massive movie, one of the biggest movies of the year, at least in the United States. It remains to be seen how big it's going to be overseas, because the Wicked musical has, I think, awareness that waxes and wanes depending on where you are in the world, but either way, it's going to be a big movie, and it makes sense, just all the pieces coming together in this big way. John M. Chu, the director, hardly any slouch, a great choice to be frank. Of course, recently made In the Heights, also Step Up 3D. He knows his way around a musical, of course, really, I think, breaking out in a blockbuster sense with Crazy Rich Asians back in 2018. And this film is expertly cast. Its 2 stars are Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande. Cynthia Erivo, thespian, Tony winner, amazing singer, great actor as well. Ariana Grande, amazing singer, that much is obvious, and someone who, of course, comes from the Disney background, has shown great comedic chops on Saturday Night Live on more than one occasion, and is perhaps a bit of an untapped reservoir when it comes to being an on-screen acting presence. I thought Wicked Part 1 was a lot of fun. It's basically everything you come to expect from a Wicked film adaptation. Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande are both excellent. We know how good of a singer both of them are. Grande is able to steal the movie in many respects because she's able to have this comedic lean to her portrayal of Glinda. Erivo has a harder role playing Elphaba, but also does quite a good job. The message of Wicked has never been subtle, but I think for the grandeur, pomp, and circumstance that you expect from a big, high-flying musical, this film delivers it. I think John Chu's saturated style visually actually works pretty well, and despite the fact this movie has plenty of CGI, I think overall it looks good. Now, that might not be for everyone. This movie is certainly a lot visually, and it's also just a lot plot-wise. This movie is over 2.5 hours long, and of course it's only the first act of the Wicked musical. But if that's what you're into, this movie is very much giving you what you want. If you think about like the characters in Wicked, right? Erivo's Elphaba, Grande's Glinda, they're, I don't want to call them archetypical, but Elphaba, especially in the Wicked musical, is not the most like sophisticated character arc per se. It's pretty standard, like ostracized character, gets pushed towards being villainized, and in general, the overall message of this film and this play, again, kind of obvious, kind of beats you over the head with its messaging, but it is familiar to this day. Of course, the rise of fascist tendencies, in this case, the titular Wizard of Oz, and his desire to control and, quote, give the people an enemy, making things easier and whatnot. There's familiar beats today when you watch the story of Wicked, the same way there was when the play came out. However, you don't really have to even lock into the greater message that Wicked's about, just because I think it's a really fun time. In general, I liked the musical numbers throughout the film. I would say it's obvious that the best song in Wicked is Defying Gravity, which is the, kind of show-stopping ending musical number at the end of Act 1 on stage and at the end of this film, for part 1. And apart from that, I think there's plenty of other good ones. Popular comes to mind, but I think the film is constructed in such a way that you have, the greater ensemble on screen, the fellow Oz students and whatnot at the university that Elphaba and Glinda meet at. They kind of fill out the screen and the sound of the movie, and that works well. And then because Erivo and Grande can really soar, the songs are able to really, really flourish. I think when Erivo and Grande harmonize together, I wish we got more of it, to be honest. But when they do harmonize, it's tremendous just because the range is tremendous. It's so good, and Ariana, I think her performance is really fun because she adds a lot of these flourishes with her voice, hitting high notes and just being super extra. And she's so great at doing that, and it makes the performance a lot of fun. We've known she's had comedic chops from SNL, but like it was really on full display with this. I thought she was really, really great in the role. One of her underlings is played by Bowen Yang, also like a great piece of like subtle like supporting casting, just because Bowen Yang from SNL can very easily like do side eye and one liners and ad libs and stuff, and there's a lot of, I think, really funny little bits of humor littered throughout the movie when we're in between musical numbers. It's also interesting to just think about Wicked in a meta sense, because movie musicals have hardly been successful at the box office lately. Think of recent bombs like Dear Evan Hansen or even John M. Chu's In the Heights, which was excellent but did not perform well during the pandemic box office. It's been a bit of tough sledding recently, but the awareness with Wicked has been so huge, and it makes a lot of sense, and I think Ariana Grande's star power has a lot to do with that, and it's actually funny to think about this in a certain sense being a more significant part of her career this year than her last album, Eternal Sunshine, was an album that I liked, but was not as popular or as mainstream as her past works, funny enough. If there's any like quibbles to take with Wicked Part 1, I'd say the metaphor of the rise of fascism and whatnot. In this case, it's like the silencing of animals that have the ability to speak in the world of Oz, but that's, going away as the wizard is trying to get rid of this dissent and whatnot. It's a bit on the nose. I think Peter Dinklage's voice performance as Dr. Dillamond, this goat professor at Shiz University, is pretty strong. They're not introduced as villains, but the ostensible villains of the film, the wizard, played by Jeff Goldblum, small role, and then also his underling slash collaborator, who's also like the head of the university, played by Michelle Yeoh. Obviously, those are great presences. We know them well. They're familiar. We should also note Ethan Slater, who plays one of the Munchkins, Bo Woodsman, who's in love with Glinda. Of course, Ethan Slater was in a relationship with Ariana Grande during the production of this film. A lot of tabloid attention was factored in with that. That being said, I think for his role, again, supporting role, he does a good job with the film. I also quite enjoyed Jonathan Bailey as Fiyero, the prince whom they encounter at school. He's obviously a dashing, conventionally handsome man, but I thought he was also pretty charming and did a good job of holding the screen alongside Arrivo and Ariana. Not unexpected, but there's a great cameo from Idina Menzel and Kristen Chenoweth in the film. Of course, they are the original Elphaba and Glinda on Broadway, 20 plus years ago. It's fun to see them in my theater. There was actually some big claps when they showed up from obviously a big fan of the musical. If anything, I'm curious what part two is able to do, because the Wicked Act 2 on stage is a lot shorter than Act 1. And we got a lot of the musical in this first, in this part 1 as a film. We got basically all of Act 1, right? And they even added to it. That's why it's so long. But they're going to have to add more for, part 2, the film, to come together completely. So I think we'll get some original songs created for part 2, which is, of course, coming out in a year's time. And along those lines, Defying Gravity, as performed by Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande, is not eligible for Academy Award for Best Original Song because it is not, in fact, an original song, as we know. That being said, I think the performance was good. Will we hear at the Oscars performed anyway? Perhaps. We'll see if they change any rules regarding that. But I think Wicked's going to be big, and it's, I think, justly earned a lot of critical praise. Again, you're couching it as it's a big bombastic musical, but as far as big bombastic musicals go, this one was quite good and basically did everything it set out to do. And also, I think it ends in a very acceptable, self-contained manner, despite the fact that it's clearly still a part 1. So very satisfied with how Wicked Part 1 went. Now I'm just curious to see how big can this movie get, how big will it be overseas. Time will tell. And of course, make sure you're supporting the other part of Wicked this weekend and seeing Gladiator 2. But let me know what your favorite moment of Wicked. What do you want to see next in part 2? And for more movie reviews, subscribe. And I'll see you next time. What's up, Will Mac Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of GNX, Kendrick Lamar's 6th album. This was surprise dropped in the middle of the afternoon Eastern time today. Not expected. We did expect that a Kendrick album was in the making, coming soon, nebulously, but certainly was not expecting it today. Of course, Kendrick Lamar's last album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, came out over 2 years ago in 2022, and that was an album that got a lot of critical and commercial success, but also perhaps not the most beloved Kendrick Lamar album due to the pretty consistently thorny material in the song and kind of the lack of hits compared to past Kendrick albums. Of course, this has not been a year without Kendrick Lamar. There was certainly expectation that Kendrick did have a new album coming soon because, of course, he was announced to be headlining the Super Bowl next year. And, of course, that was coming on the heels of Kendrick's 2024 thus far. We have had a lot of Kendrick this year. Of course, his beef with Drake absolutely going nuclear earlier this year, culminating in Not Like Us becoming one of the biggest rap songs in several years. It's approaching 1 billion streams on Spotify. The beef is well-trodden territory at this point. I have a different video talking about the Drake-Kendrick beef. We're not going to rehash that here. I will be talking about Not Like Us again pretty soon when it comes to making my top 10 songs of 2024 list, so come back for that. That being said, Kendrick gave us a new album, and Kendrick is an album artist, as we know, so whenever you get a full body of work from Kenny, you expect a lot because his body of work needs no introduction at this point. I did a Kendrick Lamar albums ranking in the past, so my previous thoughts on all the other albums is well established. Here we are now at GNX, which is also the first album release from Kendrick that is not associated with Top Dog Entertainment or Aftermath. Of course, Kendrick now out on his own with PG Lang and his new deal with Interscope. Kendrick Lamar's 6th album, GNX, is a significantly more accessible record than his last album, Mr. Morale. I don't think this album has nearly as much depth and richness in storytelling as his last album did, but what it might be lacking in personal candor and like really detailed introspection in terms of the high bar we associate with Kendrick Lamar, GNX more than makes up for that with just a lot of hits. This album is very much coming in the lineage of the success of Not Like Us. Production is incredibly Los Angeles. The bounce is all over the place. Also some hyphy Bay Area influence here. It's very West Coast. It's very LA. And Kendrick talks about his homage and love for his home on the album. This is also Kendrick's album of kind of putting his hands up in the air and calling on any would-be adversary at this point, given how triumphantly he slayed Drake earlier this year. It makes a lot of sense, but I really appreciate his candor on the very first song, talking about the response to him getting the Super Bowl next year. Kendrick is not afraid to take on the haters, and that's very clear on this album. Production-wise, I think the album is honestly pretty slight, but that doesn't mean that beats are bad. I think these are just kind of subtle beats, often only a few flourishes, but a lot of these flourishes, these beats really rock. The first song, Whacked Out Murals, I thought was really amazing, self-reflection from Kendrick. You have this like distorted choir starting the song, then these horns kick in when Kendrick starts rapping, and then the song almost like re-picks itself back up, and Kendrick starts rapping with even more of his chest. This is where you get the Lil Wayne line, which I thought was like an instant classic from him, honestly. I used to bump the Carter 3. I held my Rolly chain proud. Irony, I think my hard work let Lil Wayne down. Bars, man, that's so good. And honestly, I don't think I really talked about this to this point, but like the really strange response to Kendrick getting the Super Bowl, as if the regional location of the Super Bowl means Lil Wayne should have gotten it, as if Lil Wayne is on that level as a performer ever, let alone right now, was always hilarious to me. And I'm happy that he talked about it. This is great. He keeps going on the song, though. Got the Super Bowl, and Nas the only one congratulate me. All these dudes agitated. I'm just glad it's on their faces. And again, Kendrick openly will call out the haters and flex, because he deserves a flex at this point. I appreciate it from him. Track 2, though, is incredibly exciting because this is Squabble Up. This song already had a long life as a snippet, coming out of the end of the Drake-Kendrick beef, and then people were, wondering, would this song exist? Let's look back on Kendrick's All Right music video featuring a snippet that never ended up seeing the light of day as a full song. I was not confident that the song that is now known as Squabble Up would exist in its full form, but the fact that it does is awesome, and the fact that this song is actually even better in its full form than its snippet is great. That's not always the case when it comes to a viral snippet. But Squabble Up, I mean, the West Coast bounce, man, like this is it to a T. This song is just a bop. I mean, I love the call and response section. I think it's just a complete banger. Like, I think this is very much, again, sonically similar to Not Like Us, but it makes sense because that is a really hot sound right now thanks to Kendrick's success. From there, we immediately slow down with track 3, Luther, which features SZA. You kind of get like melodic Kenny. Not my favorite mode of his, but he's really, I think, over the years, ever since like Damn, really honed this craft and this side of him. So it's not my favorite, cup of tea when it comes to his performance styles and his deliveries, but he is pretty good at it these days. And of course, SZA, always a welcome presence. Track 4, Man at the Garden. This one's interesting because like the production is so slender. It's just these subtle drums, really, and then you have almost like a shortness of breath, dominating the flow from Kendrick, and it's kind of interesting, I suppose, because of the subject matter, the storytelling he's doing, talking about his family. I like the way the song swells and you get these like doubled vocals. I love the way it ends basically with that very passionate like line from Kendrick, "Tell me why you deserve to be the greatest of all time, motherfucker." Like, goddamn. Again, Kendrick, not afraid to toot his own horn, but again, he's earned it. Track 5, Hey Now, produced by DJ Mustard. This song is a interesting one because it's a lot subtler than we expect from DJ Mustard these days. You have this almost like jungle, like forest vibe, but with the drums, and the bass then eventually like bounces back. Kendrick gives you this very aggressive flow. The beat kind of evolves from there, giving you like these chimes as well. And then we get the first of several kind of non-star features. This one from Dodie Six, who is a South Central LA rapper who's currently incarcerated. There's a handful of rappers of a similar fame level on this album. I just love that from Kendrick, right? Because it's a great example of him actually practicing what he preaches and putting on other people from his home, a home that he professed a lot of love for, of course, in the past. That fueled a lot of his anger and vitriol towards Drake this year already. But he talks about his love for LA and all of LA specifically, Compton, South Central, etc. That's all throughout this album, lyrically, and he's kind of practicing what he preaches by putting on these people who are not stars, right? It takes a lot less work to put YG on this album than it does to take guys who aren't that famous. And he does that a handful of times. I think it's really cool. And also, I thought Dodie Six was great. I thought it was an awesome feature. He fit the song perfectly. I should note at this point that every single song on this album is co-produced by Jack Antonoff. I never expected this. I mean, we talk about Jack Antonoff all the time in terms of his work primarily with female pop singers of various, shapes and sizes. And to have Soundwave and Jack Antonoff be the two big producers on this, I just didn't see it coming. I don't really have even much to add on his contributions because it's so hard to discern, and Kendrick works with so many people. Kamasi Washington also involved on this album, DJ Dahi. It's just Terrence Martin. Like, these are familiar faces for Kendrick albums, but maybe this album being slighter, production wise, not being super super in depth. Maybe that's the Jack influence. You kind of think of like his effect on Taylor Swift in terms of making these more monochrome ambient beats. Like, I don't know, it's just a guess. I have no idea. But it stands out for sure, his contributions on the credit list. Track 6, Reincarnated. This song is crazy. This is Kendrick invoking Tupac with his flow and doing it incredibly well. And it's not just the flow, it's also like the vocal tics, it's the tone of voice. And he's not the first person to do this. Of course, The Game famously did this, but it's pretty sick. And it's also great, very timely, of course. Kendrick calling out Drake for, basically dancing on Pac's grave in a certain sense during the beef. Of course, Drake infamously, I should say, using AI Tupac on one of his songs that didn't completely land. And now you have such artistry from Kendrick, in this case, using this homage to Tupac to then communicate this song about drug abuse and conversations with family and stuff. Like, it's just a completely unique song, very Kendrick Lamar. This is a song that's, I think, very at home on other Kendrick albums in terms of its depth, in terms of its storytelling ability, but also its re-listenability. Really impressive. And then to follow that off, we have TV Off, track 7. I think between Reincarnated, TV Off, and Squabble Up, you have like 3 canon entries from Kendrick. He always seems to give us 1 or 2, right? TV Off, also Mustard co-produced. This beat is sick. It's like the LA bounce, but with like violins on it. Like, it just sounds incredible, complete banger. And then this beat's very involved. The switch up, the horn showing up, and the horn is going crazy at the end with like the bass hits. Kendrick rapping his ass off throughout the song. This one's a huge highlight. Then again, we slow it down with track 8, Dodger Blue, which is like an LA love letter type song, lyrically more of a slighter flow. You got some sung features. Roddy Ricch is on here. Song's just okay. It's probably my least favorite song on the album. We bounce back though with track 9, Peekaboo, which the LA bounce is here once again, a faster flow from Kendrick. The hook's a little grating to me, but I enjoyed Ashiki, one of the features. I thought he was floating, really holding his own, going bar for bar with Kendrick. It was quite impressive. Again, another example of Kendrick putting someone on or giving a big platform to someone anyway. And then we have the Hard Part 6. Of course, Drake attempted to release the Hard Part 6 during the beef. That was not a song he officially released, of course. And I love that Kendrick didn't call this Hard Part 7. He just pretends that doesn't even exist and made his own Hard Part 6. And unsurprisingly, this is a better version. This is a better song. Of course, the Hard series at this point is very storied in the Kendrick Lamar lore. If you know, you know. And this one is one of my favorite Heart songs because this is Kendrick's like storytelling about his come up, specifically around the rise and his early part in Top Dog Entertainment and the Black Hippie as a result. Talking about early on, it was all about making J-Rock happen. Kendrick, of course, famously started out as J-Rock's hype man, right? He talks about Schoolboy Q and Absol and Dave Free and Punch, right? Like in Soundwave. Like I think it's a tremendous piece of storytelling and a great moment for fans such as myself who were really into all of Black Hippie, in that 2010s period when they were like a real collective at that time, a real supergroup, so to speak. Makes you long for a different time. And Kendrick admits on this song that Black Hippie didn't work out because of him, because of his own ambitions changing and whatnot. I mean, I love to hear that kind of self-admission, so to speak, from him. And of course, we know they're cool. The Black Hippie guys all showed up at Kendrick's The Pop Out concert earlier this summer, which was that big LA love fest that Kendrick and friends all performed at the Forum, I believe it was, or the Intuit Dome, wherever it was, right? So we know they're all cool, but I love this like almost bit of closure you get from this song, even if no one was necessarily asking, it's like, what's up with Kendrick and Black Hippie? We weren't. It's still cool. Then from there we have the two last songs. You have GNX, which has a bunch of other smaller faces such as Peso. I think that song's fine. And then the last song, Gloria, second feature from SZA, and kind of similar to like Kendrick's rapping on Miss Morale a lot because he talks about meeting his wife and like the early days of their relationship and things like that. And I don't think Kendrick gets as soul bearing on this album as he did on Mr. Morale. Mr. Morale, Kendrick was not afraid. In fact, he was choosing to expose things about himself, things that people might not like. And that's what I think makes that album so admirable, is that he's not afraid to show you his warts and tell you why he might be a bad guy in certain respects and certain things. And, speaking about his family life and his beliefs and things like that. And that's just, kind of in contrast with the fact that that might not be the most fun album to revisit per se, but, it's one of his most ambitious from a storytelling perspective. I don't think we're really at that level with GNX. This is kind of similar to like Damn in terms of being a little bit more populist leaning, right? A little bit more in the hit department and not a full body of work like from a storytelling perspective. Obviously Good Kid, To Pimp a Butterfly, we're not in that stratosphere with this. But I think that's also fine because this album really feels like the final grace note, the stamp, the exclamation point on the 2024 he had, where he triumphed over Drake by releasing a hit song, something that was Drake's MO, not Kendrick's, right? I think to some people, they might not be impressed enough with the production on this. They might think this is rushed in a certain respect. I don't know how you could really feel that way just because Kendrick as a rapper is still so damn capable. His floor is so high. And he sheds a lot of, I think, like legitimate like gripes and comments about things, and it's all very recent, right? Again, Lil Wayne stuff, the Black Hippie stuff, a lot of addendum and conclusion things regarding what happened with Drake, namely the Tupac homage, right? I think all that works, like, and it works well, and it's Kendrick freaking Lamar, so like it's not ever bad. I do think it's an album I will revisit because a lot of these songs are very fun and enjoyable. Whether this stands the test of time in his discography, of course, this is the first day it came out. Hard to say that yet, but I think I like it more than Untitled and Mastered. I'll tell you that. But let me know. I know that's a controversial take. My placement of Untitled and Mastered in the rankings did not go over well. But let me know. What did you think of Kendrick Lamar's GNX? Obviously, the surprise is a big factor of this, but what did you think of it? Like, are you happy with the kind of combination of hits and legitimate like lyrical commentary that he gives you on this? Like, is it like the happy medium in a certain sense? Do you agree with that? Let me know. And for more rap reviews, more music reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. All right, that's going to do for the pod this week. Next week, we have another big movie coming out, Disney's Moana 2. It's going to be massive. We know that much already. Also, the premiere of the new Star Wars Disney Plus series, Skeleton Crew, starring Jude Law. We'll see what that's all about. And I think two new shows that I'm interested in, The Agency on Paramount Plus, which is the English remake of The Bureau, and also Netflix's Senna series about F1 driver Ayrton Senna. And there might be some other movies to get to as well. We'll see. We'll see what else happens over the holidays. Make sure you subscribe. YouTube.com/nostalgiapod. Linktree.com/nostalgiapod. See links below. Get the best of 2024 Spotify playlist link below. Let me know it's good, and I'll see you next week.